My name is Christian Ashley, a seminary student and servant of God, and you are listening to the Let Nothing Move You podcast, a proud Anazal Ministries podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to the Let Nothing Move You podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, as it is officially been an entire year since I started doing this show. The last episode would have been delivered, I think, a day early. If I remember correctly, I think it was the 27th of 2023. So I think that one ended up landing on the 26th. So I'm officially starting it now. And I'm surprised because I'm not one for remembering goals and dates and stuff like that. And I just so happened to be prompted to think about that and realize, oh, wow, it's been a year. And it's been a lot of fun getting through this with all of you. Like, you guys have been the best as far as sharing the show and letting me know what you think about what's going on here. For an audience as small as we are, I get a fairly large amount of people saying, hey, I enjoyed this, or what did you consider this? And that brings a lot of joy to me that, not only that you listen, but you also care. So shout out to you guys for sticking with me through all this. I am immensely blessed by all this. I wanted to get as far as we have, but there was always that part of me be like, oh, you'll get over this a couple months in and just stop doing it, or you'll let time slip away from you and you'll miss a week. And I have not missed a single week this whole time, which surprises me. I'm immensely happy that happened. Immensely joyful. But once again, guys, I couldn't have done this without you. Like I said, it's a very small group of listeners out there, and I'm talking like double digits. But each and every one of you listening makes me want to keep doing this, makes me want to keep pursuing this and getting into the Word and expounding upon it. And I know that not everyone who listens as well agrees with the things that I have to say, which also makes me feel really good that you're willing to hear my side of things. And some of you will say, I didn't really care for what you had to say here, or I disagree with your assessment of God here. It's like, I'm open to those conversations. I love having those conversations. So if you're out there and you've never contacted me before, hey, letnothingmoviepodcast@gmail.com. I want to hear what you have to say on these things. If you were to say, hey, congrats for a whole year or whatever, hey, get in contact with me. I'm not the best communicator in the world, but I will do what I can to get back to you in time and just show my appreciation for you being willing to reach out to me like some people have done here. But with all that in mind, let's just get into it. Actually, no, let's not do that. This is going to be a special episode in that we're going to do 3 chapters this week, which is the first time we've done that I recall. We've done 2 chapters before, just when there's not as much meat to the bones as I would like, when I'm expounding on certain things. But this one is because after this week, I will be recording a special episode with another friend, the second guest on the show. Brandon Knight of My Seminary Life and I will be going over Genesis 32 together. So you guys, I had considered, do I just do 29 and 30, or do I just do one of those by themselves and I do 30 and 31 together? It's like, nope. I just decided for the sake of it, to keep things a little on schedule, I'm going to do 29 through 31 together. And I'm hoping to get some more people on here, just like I did with Karai from Foreign Saints. We did Genesis 19 together, for those of you who remember, like other people as well, to hear their voices and get some more people into Genesis with me. And then I'll probably do the same thing for Exodus as well, and so on and so forth. Just so I'm not the only voice you hear. I'm not the only opinion that you hear on the show. There will definitely be some people I have in mind that I want on the show that theologically we don't always agree with one another, but we do believe in the truth of what Scripture has to say. So there's that. So keep that in mind. Next week should be Genesis 32 with Brandon Knight and I, he of My Seminary Life and a good friend of mine. But today, like I said, we'll be doing Genesis 29 through 31. We'll be starting in verses 1 through 12. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone in the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well, and see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and a stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Now we start here. Jacob has been forced to flee from home to avoid the wrath of his brother Esau for the trickery he placed upon him, and for Esau being dumb enough to fall for some of the stuff he did along the way. But that's another point. He has had to make a 450-mile journey from where they were to Haran. A journey where he has been blessed by God before this and say, "Look, I'm with you. Your descendants are going to be countless. We're going to get things done together." And God pulls through. He wasn't accosted by bandits. No, he didn't end up in a slave trade. He didn't end up murdered on the road by another traveler or by a wild animal or something. No, he made the whole journey there with next to nothing to his name and found his family. Entering territory that he knows nothing about. I mean, save for probably what Rebecca has told him about, this is where I grew up and my brother's there and he probably has kids by now and all this. And he knows nothing of this place. Yet he has trusted God, much in the way that Abraham's servant did in chapter 24. Although in this specific scenario, the suitor himself is going out to this area, not only to find a new life, but also, as counseled by his parents, to find a new wife in this area. Now, as a frame of reference for what's going on here in Jacob's life, he, if we take things a little more literally, which I do, is 77 years old. Now, I don't know about you. I feel like I'm coming apart at the seams and I'm only 33. I know some of that is me being a little prissy little princess about how I maintain my body, and others is like, the body naturally degrades over time. But for him, he is fit. He is able. See him move that massive stone away, and I hardly doubt that I would have been able to do the same at my peak physical fitness. But as I said before, if we take this text literally, which I do, that tells me that the men and women of this time did not have the same physical characteristics that you and I do. That we are further examples of the degradation that sin has caused the world. And this is once again assuming that the world is fairly young. And at this point in his life, he hasn't been married. He hasn't set off to do his own business. He's been with his mother and father and brother for 77 years of his life. And some people think that kicking their kids out of the nest at 18 is too young for them to do that. It's wild. Now, as we look at this, we see that the ancient patriarchs just lived longer. They seem to have had healthier lives in some respects to our current human condition. And as far as this whole scenario is concerned, with Jacob's age being 77, it kind of brings me an immense comfort. Obviously, as we've spoken before, given my own marital status, or rather the lack thereof, that it kind of shows that, hey, God's timing could take decades for marriage or may never happen at all. Now, obviously, Jacob's going to live a lot longer than I will, but still, that's 77 years that he had to remain faithful before God would bring him to where he does, and he meets his wives here. And we'll get to that later on. And it's also one of those things I have to be careful about, because as I remind myself of something like this that I've read before, it makes me want to throw that information back at certain people who've levied accusations against me for being unworthy of leadership in some areas because of being unmarried. Being like, oh, well, you revere these biblical figures. Well, remind me when Jacob got married again. Remind me when Abraham got married again. And as factually true as those statements would be, it would also reveal my heart's not where it's at. So, like, relearning this information, because I've read through this several times before, but like it's nice to be reminded of certain things. Kind of makes me go through that spiral. And as we often do, if something is affecting you in life and you see something that even tangentially is kind of related to it, you kind of focus on it a bit. And I'm focusing on this right now. So it's just some food for thought there. Now, honestly, the main point here is that trust God's timing. Like, the point, as always, is to trust in Him and submit to His authority, regardless of the answer. For all we know, God may have told Jacob his whole life, hey, wait, without ever telling him when it's going to happen. Or maybe he would have been completely silent. Or maybe he told Isaac and Rebekah and not Jacob, and they had to wait. Or who knows? But the point was, Jacob was faithful, and I'm called to do the same regardless of the answer that I get. So are you. If you're married, if you're not, submit to Him. Now, to start here, we see Jacob meet one of his future wives, and once again, that is plural. We'll get to that, in Rachel. And the kissing here, the greeting here, that is not intended to be romantic. It's a very different cultural thing of the time from what we've studied. It seems to be, even though there may have been an attraction between the two of them, as much as he gushes over her in the next couple chapters, like, this is instead an older custom that was a bit of familial kissing, not on the lips or anything like that, the cheek or something like that, on the forehead, just to show your kinship with one another. So if I were to do that to someone that I had never met before, but I knew that we were family, this would be a way of her knowing without me telling her, hey, we're family. So that's that. Now we'll move on from there to verses 13 through 20. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak. Some of your translations may say soft or dull. But Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. As we get here through these chapters, I'm going to be ragging on Laban a lot. Laban is one of those people I've mentioned before. He's a very complicated man, but ultimately more evil than good, I would argue. But here, his hospitality should not be disregarded. He is living out what the people of Sodom and Gomorrah did not. Yeah, sure, you could say, oh, he's just doing it to family, but still, it would have been something he should have done regardless of the person's status towards him. And he watches over Jacob and gives him a place to stay, learns of his situation, and knows, well, I can't just send him out anywhere. Who knows? Esau may send someone after him and may try to get him killed. Like, can't have that happen. Not while I'm around. So Laban does the right thing, stands up for his nephew, and gives him a place to stay. Now, as I said before, like, he's a complicated man. He's a man of various motives and shrewdness, as we will see in these chapters. But even though he stands to gain from watching over Jacob, he still opens his home to his relative and makes sure he is well taken care of, at least at the start. That is to be commended and praised. Good job, Laban. However, Laban will soon show his true character multiple times over the course of Jacob's time with him. Laban will sense an opportunity to utilize a man in his distress for Laban's benefit. Like I said, Jacob has nowhere to go that isn't as safe as spending time with his family, so Laban can utilize him as he sees fit. Now, There is nothing wrong together with a family working together for a common goal. Um, and for some to benefit a little more than others. Like a boss should make more than his employees. I mean, that's just how things should go. Because without them, this wouldn't be happening. And the employees should be treated and rewarded as well, because the same thing applies. They wouldn't be able to get things done without them. But there's also more of them than the boss. But to do so, as Laban will do in these chapters, with the explicit purpose of control, is a bridge too far. A boss should never know that if I just give them just enough money, they are dependent upon me, and I can lower it or raise it as much as I want and get them to do my bidding. That's a bad boss. A bad boss will give you what you need to live out your life comfortably, to have a little spending money, to be able to enjoy life, to go on a trip somewhere, to be able to enjoy this world that God has placed us in. A bad boss will just give you just enough and keep you wanting more while he's hoarding it all away and not using it well. Laban has some good qualities as a leader and some very terrible qualities as a leader. And we'll see those as time goes on here. Now, also, rightfully, he remarks that Jacob may be his guest, but Laban cannot benefit from his labors without paying him something in return. This is a good thing. It is good for him not to treat his relative like a servant, like a slave. It would also be good for him not to treat his servants and slaves as such, but let's throw a little cultural understanding here into the mix. They don't think the way we do. So despite his greed, Laban still doesn't want to treat family as a slave. And hey, once again, gold star, commendable act here. Unfortunately, ultimately, he does so because of his familial connections rather than love for his fellow man. This is, well, if people see me using and abusing my nephew like this, how are they going to look at me? This is all for image. This is all for pride. All is wrong. I would say that all is wrong. I correct myself there. A primary motivator is how people look at Laban. So he does this for his nephew, also out of love for Jacob. But Laban being Laban, I kind of weigh a little one over the other, knowing who this man is and knowing there's no other verse out there like Lot that I can think of where it actually shows him being a righteous man. Now, Jacob, on the other hand, having spent time with Laban's family, has found himself attracted to Rachel and asked for her to be his bride. Now, since he has no way of offering a dowry, which is what is immensely expected of him, since he has left everything else behind, he probably just has food and the clothes on his back by the time he got to Haran. He agrees to work for 7 years in exchange for the right to marry her. Like, this could have, I don't think the number is as symbolic as people always make it to be. 7 shows up several times throughout Scripture. I think this is in the effect of, hey, I'm giving you a set amount of time for your daughter. You are getting this labor from me so that I can be with her. This is my dowry to you. And it could have been 3 years. It could have been 10 years, blah, 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 whatever. But Laban accepts, and Jacob agrees to work for him. Now, Rachel in the text is described as being very beautiful. And Jacob is so enamored with her that despite a 7-year wait, his love for her does not grow weak. Now, if you're keeping score, that means as things evolve, he'll be 84 slash 85, depending on if there's enough time for him to have had a birthday in that point in time. Leah, on the other hand, is described as plainer than her sisters, and Jacob has no desire to seek her out. Now, this brings up some questions like, how do we handle attraction and romance and all that? Well, attraction is ultimately something at the whims of the eye of the beholder. There is nothing inherently wrong with being attracted to the opposite gender and having qualities, both physical and emotional in nature, that you feel a stronger attachment to than others. Some people like blue eyes. Some people like brown eyes. Some people like green eyes. Some people like red hair. Some people like blue hair. Some people like blonde hair. Some people like people who are taller than them, who are shorter than them. Some people like people who can crack a joke. Some people want their spouse to be very serious. All those qualities, there's nothing negative about those qualities. It's simply something we are hardwired towards that in our own minds, separate from someone else. That's what makes us tick when we're looking for a romantic partner. Like me, I like people who are smart, who are wise, who will laugh at my jokes, who can hold a conversation with me. And even if I don't understand what they're saying, because they know what they're talking about, I will be in that conversation listening to what they have to say and caring about what they have to say. I like someone who can, shoot barbs back at me. When I throw a witty one-liner at them, I expect one back at me, and that war begins until someone wins. That makes me happy. There have been attempts at relationships in the past, just for full honesty's sake, where I have made a cutting joke, hoping that one would come back my way, and I've destroyed that poor girl's confidence. And I had to ask for forgiveness. I had to say, hey, that wasn't my intention. I am so very sorry. And it was just one sign as a red flag to say, hey, we probably wouldn't work out together. And better that it happened now than a lot later on. So love who you love in that respect, within the confines of what God intends for marriage, what he intends for you to do. But also recognize that not all those features have to be in that person. They're who they are. They're not who you should mold them into being. And the fact we get here back to the story of that Jacob sees Leah as, less attractive than her sister, it doesn't mean that Leah has some less inherent worth to the world or to Jacob, but it showcases some of his priorities when it comes to a relationship. And of course, physical attraction played a part in why he fell for Rachel. But what shows us it wasn't just this aspect of her that drew her to him was his willingness to wait for 7 years, which only grew his love for her. Now, I don't know about you. If I'm 7 years with a person and I still like her, and then we get married, yeah, that tells me I really like this woman. As opposed to 7 years and be like, you start noticing the flaws. You start noticing the things you don't get along with as well, the things you don't really enjoy doing together. It's like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be here. And that's good. Even though it doesn't end in a success as in marriage, it's good that, hey, we didn't waste each other's time as much as we could have. We're not harming one another by continuing in something we shouldn't be in. But for Jacob and Rachel, their love increased because of the time they spent together, because of how they learned more about one another. Look, we are designed to seek out love, not only for your more biological needs, but also for our emotional and spiritual needs. It is nice to have someone you can trust alongside you, working together for the same common purpose of serving God, that is going to call you out on stuff, or is also going to be someone you can listen to, or that you can listen to them when stuff is going on in their life and they need someone to do that. So you sometimes offering advice, other times shutting up and just letting them be. Some are called to this in marriage, and others are called to remain celibate. Both have equal importance in God's eyes for different reasons. As we will see, Jacob is going to marry both of these women, one against his initial wishes. But before we get there, we need to get to that good old topic and discussion on cousin marriage. Now, our modern eyes, we look at such things as anathema. And several states within the United States, but not the entire country, have laws against first cousin marriage, which this would be. Now, regardless of our personal feelings on the matter, this is never once described as evil, sinful, or unlawful in the Bible for cousins to marry. If you're as shocked as I was a couple of years ago when I realized that, well, welcome to the team. I had just implicitly thought, it's like, oh, well, it's somewhere in Leviticus or Numbers or something. It's like, nope, not a thing. Now, other sexual unions are described as such things, evil, sinful, unlawful, because they are things like incest, homosexuality, bestiality, so on and so forth. Now, God has his reasons for those. When we get there, we'll talk about it. But for focusing on the cousin part now, our reasons for banning this come from how we did learn over time historically, when cousin marriages become too rampant, they can ruin the gene pool. If it keeps happening, genetic deformities and abnormalities can start popping up a bit more, but not normally the first time it happens. So especially if we're looking at history through a monarchical standpoint. You've got your Habsburg jaw or chin or whatever it's described as. That's kind of like the textbook case, or you've got the hemophilia that Queen Victoria had as a result of all the cousin marriages that were happening between the different European powers, just to make sure that royals were marrying royals. That kind of diluted the gene pools to the point that those things started propping up more often. That's when it's too bad, is when it runs rampant like that. But recall, once again, that we banned those things in certain countries, in certain states, because it was happening too much. Now, after this point in time, as far as genealogies are concerned with the family of Abraham, they don't happen that frequently. Like all the different tribes of Israel, they're going to be from very different unions, that even though they're all descended from the same person, the gene pool is just shifted enough at that point in time. That's not really a thing. I'm sure there's still cousins marrying cousins at that point in time, but not to the point where it ends up being something that could harm the child at that point in time from any union that happened there. So that's that. I could talk about it more, but I do have 2 other chapters to get through, and we're not even done with the first. So we'll go from there to verses 21 through 30. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Now, good old Laban, clever and shrewd man that he is, has deceived his daughters and his son-in-law with his actions, through which he stands to gain much. Now, according to the cultural aspects at the time, Leah, as the older daughter, would typically be married off first, so he arranges matters for Jacob to not discover the ruse until it's too late and he has consummated the relationship. Now, you may be scratching your head out there. How is this possible? How could he not know, if he loves Rachel this much, that this isn't who he desired? Several things. This was done under the cover of night. This was done after a bunch of partying, so Jacob may very well have been drunk at some point in time here, or buzzed enough to where he wasn't in full control of his mental faculties. Leah, typically at the time, would have been wearing a veil over her face, and Rachel probably would have done the same. They might have had a little parent trap situation. They switched for a bit, and there we go. This masked her appearance. And guess what? This whole artificial lighting system that we have here, that's so wonderful, and it's one of the many reasons why I'm so glad I live when we do, that and air conditioning, that doesn't exist. So when it is dark, unless you have a candle or something like that around, you're not going to see the other person. So Jacob does what he does, Leah does what she does, and Jacob isn't the wiser because of all these factors working against him. And Jacob was easily fooled by this plan, much like he had fooled his own father to gain the blessing that he received. So I'm going to say turnabout is fair play here. Not that this is how things should have happened, not that Leah deserves this or Rachel deserves this or Jacob does, but buddy, for a trickster, you got to up your game. And he's been completely and utterly fooled. Now, once again, as far as the women are concerned here, it doesn't appear like Leah was really consulted for her opinion. But as time goes on here, we do see that there seems to have been a bit of unrequited love for Jacob on her part that made her willing to go along with this scheme, and hoping that, maybe if this happens, maybe he'll love me the way that I've loved him. That hopeless romantic idea we sometimes get in our head. If we just do this, that other person, they'll come around and they'll give me what I want from them, instead of, actually caring about that person's needs and their desires and stuff like that. We will change ourselves in some way, or we will force them to change in some way just to get what we desire from that scenario. And Leah has done this. Now, when we continue on in these chapters, we're going to see the resentment that exists between these two sisters. And one thing I do want to caution is that we need to recognize that they are in an impossible situation forced upon them by their father. That does not excuse the actions that they are going to take against each other, the sisterly rivalry that's going to erupt and lead to the different factions and such that occur within these stories, just so one could be favored above the other. But it does help us understand. I don't envy either one of them in this position. It is not what they would have wanted the situation to turn out being. The only person who really, not to say they do win, they do become a family along the way, but Laban is the one who wins here. Because if Jacob were to divorce Leah, then she would have been seen as sullied and not as marriageable material, which Laban knew Jacob wouldn't divorce her because he's seen his character. And what this does is it secures both of his daughters a place as wives of a man he knew would look after them. That shrewdness does not always equal moral. Let's put it that way. This is a clever plan. It's an intelligent plan. Maybe Laban knows that there's probably no one out there who's going to treat his daughters as well as Jacob will. Sure, that doesn't excuse his actions. That doesn't excuse the trickery. Much in the same way, it doesn't Jacob's being the one who God would intend to actually bring salvation through the world through his descendants and eventually Jesus, doesn't make up for the fact that he stole Esau's birthright and his blessing. So we see Rachel is also offered as a wife in the midst of this scheme and becomes his second wife in exchange for 7 years of further service, which further tightens the hold Laban has over his nephew. Laban, at the time, has won through his craftiness, through his shrewdness. And we'll move on from there, go to verses 31 through 35, and continuing from there into chapter 30, verses 1 through 13. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. Reuben means see a son. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. That means heard in Hebrew. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. Levi kind of sounds like the Hebrew word that means attached. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Judah meaning praise in Hebrew. Then she ceased bearing. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children, or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me, and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Dan means, hold on one second, judged. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. Naphtali is kind of similar to the word in Hebrew for wrestling. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Gad is good fortune in Hebrew. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. Now imagine that. Asher sounds like the Hebrew word for happy. A lot going on here. God saw Leah's plight and worked on her behalf to show that she held just as much worth to Jacob as Rachel had. Our more modern sensibilities kind of get in the way here too, some of which I agree with, some I don't. Like, being able to bear children does not give a woman worth. But in this point in time, what do you want as a couple? You want to have children that you can love after, foster, grow among you, and then have them grow up, carry on your family name, be their own person, get stuff done. Most couples want that. Rachel desires that immensely. Jacob wants that from her too. But Leah's in the mix here. It is not Leah's fault Jacob is not attracted to her as her sister. So God, showing blessings to Leah, gives her a child through the consummation of their marriage. And because of that, Jacob's opinion of her does increase. It improves, which it should have been higher to begin with. But remember the situation they're in. Remember how he found out that he'd been tricked. That's going to cause some resentment. It creates further resentment for Rachel to arise when she isn't the first one to give Jacob a son. Now, Jacob still favors her over Leah, but this small victory helps raise Leah's place in the house, a situation that never should have existed. But we're in this situation. Laban has maneuvered things, plotted things out. He got what he wanted. Jacob is now the proud husband of 2 wives, and eventually 2 more, through Bilhah and Zilpah becoming his concubines. Now, in the Old Testament law, polygamy was not forbidden to the common man. There are many reasons for this, some of which being that a man having more wives was guaranteed a higher chance of success of having an heir. Another would be, hey, this is a time when medicine is not advanced where it should be, as it is in our times. Children, unfortunately, may not even make it outside of the womb to live. It could have been miscarried, some of whom do survive to be born. Could have been killed by an illness or an infection or something that modern medicine would solve, but they don't have access to because they don't understand the world as well as we do. As well, if you had more wives, well, guess what? That means you had one more person to watch over the kids, which makes things a lot easier in the house. And sometimes this was just used as a means of setting up political and mercantile relations with other groups and nations. Common practice. It's why the Victorian era and World War I got to the point they did is because nation kept swapping, daughters to sons on the other side so that they would have royal ties in marriages, and your mileage may vary on how some of those worked out. It's because it strengthened ties between those nations. This was common even back then. We have reports of, Egypt attempting to do this with the Hittites, so on and so forth. Solomon is going to do it later on to his massive detriment in setting up relations with other nations by marrying the daughters of Pharaoh and other kings as well. But it is specifically forbidden in the law for one group of people to have more than one wife. And those people are kings. Kings were forbidden from having multiple wives for fear of the wives leading them astray, given that kings normally would marry into the royal families of other nations in order to establish ties with them, and these wives more than likely would not worship God and hope to bring their idols into the marriage. Now, Jacob is not a king, but he kind of serves the role at this point in time. This should not have happened. God is going to use this to his glory, but it's something, if he was being a good husband, he wouldn't have let it happen. He should have been more sober-minded. He should have thought things out a little better. But here we are in this current scenario. Now, it is important to remember that the law of Moses hasn't been written yet. You know why I know it hasn't been written? Because Moses ain't alive yet. And even if it had been, the law of Moses was never meant to be the final arbiter of what was right and what was wrong. God is. And God created the law as a means to show the people of Israel, and by proxy us, that even if we somehow kept the whole law, we still wouldn't be able to save ourselves from sin. Only God can do that. Only through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, taking our sins on himself, are we capable of even having the option of having our sins removed from us. They don't have the law. And even if they did, it's kind of hard to judge them on that point. Now, Rachel, meanwhile, in the midst of this, is in despair because of her barrenness. As noted before, this is a very common theme in the book of Genesis, and here it helps highlight her helplessness to give her husband something that they both desire. Now, Jacob does get angry with Rachel for how she's handling the situation. He should definitely have been a little softer with her, should have been a bit kinder with her, but he doesn't love her any less because she is barren. And he rationally brings up, hey, if God wanted you to have a kid, you'd have a kid. But rationality isn't always the answer, as frustrating as that is for me to say out loud. It's not always going to win someone over to be rational in an argument while they're in the midst of their despair. So she contrives to have a child with her husband by proxy through her handmaiden and servant Bilhah. Jacob, being the husband, should have shot this idea down immediately. He's already in a sticky situation with two wives. In the scenario, he's adding a third. And eventually he's going to add a fourth. But since he has learned nothing from Abraham and Sarah's troubles caused by Abraham's union with Hagar, he lets this happen because he senses opportunity. He can give in to his wife's demands, and now he has a third woman that he's sexually involved with. Soon to be four, when Leah gets upset and orders his servant Zilpah to join the fray. Now, Jacob is never directly condemned for this that I can recall. And God instead chooses to bless them despite their pettiness and sinfulness, so that his will could be done. I think Jacob got off way too easy, but I'm also not God. So I'm grateful for what he does. I know there are plenty of times in my own life where I got off way too easy for what I did. So if this scenario doesn't happen, we are down several tribes of Israel. If this doesn't happen, we do not end up with the nation of Israel represented with the tribes that it has at the end of the day. That does not mean that God loved what they did to accomplish this, but it does mean that he knew what was going to happen, allowed it to happen, and made it all work for his glory and future plans. And we'll go from there to verses 14 through 24. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter to you that you would have taken my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Issachar, of course, meaning wages or hire. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him six sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Zebulun means honor in Hebrew. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." This sisterly feud has gotten to the point where arguments over mandrakes end up causing further strife in the family. In some herbal traditions, mandrakes are said to be able to promote fertility, which could be a possible reason for why Rachel desired them as much as she did. Leah, proving herself to be no better than her sister here, uses the mandrakes as a negotiating tool so that she wins the right to be with Jacob that night. I don't pretend to understand what the batting is for how this relationship works out with the 4 different women. I don't really want to, but if this is how we're handling things, something's messed up. It's a lot messed up because there really should only be one, so he can vote his time fully to her. But once again, we're in this situation that really there's a lot of blame to throw around, but not a lot of ways to solve it. So here we are, a tangled web that we weave here. And Jacob, the dumb schmuck that I do love and respect, but he's also stupid, goes along with this plan rather than doing anything that would require confrontation with his wives. Because he's got a pretty good thing going on that benefits him and weakens them. So in his sin, Jacob allows this to keep happening because, hey, pretty good deal. I get what I want. I was supposed to just get one wife. Now I'm ending up with 4. And they're all fighting with each other and they're not worried about me. Which is great husbanding right there. Yeah, husbanding being a verb now. But throughout all of this, God is still sovereign. And he uses this as an opportunity to further his designs, and he allows Leah to have more children. But God also doesn't forget Rachel. He knows the desires of Rachel's heart, and on his time blesses her to have a son, Joseph, which brings her joy to her life once more. And I think I forgot to say Joseph means may he add, and can also kind of mean taken away. This right here, I don't want to be the guy in the middle of this. I will put it that way. Negotiating between all of this mess, like, look, marriage is hard enough with just one. And I say to someone who's always worked on the outside there, which is watching other couples, I couldn't imagine 3 other women in that scenario and having to work together with them and create peace. Jacob has kind of sold out in that regard of, well, I'm okay, therefore don't worry about what they have to do. So instead of setting up, once again, I don't know how the mechanics of this is supposed to work, in a scenario where it's just supposed to be one man, one wife. That's it. Nothing else should be in that scenario. How do you bring peace into this situation? No clue. But it's definitely not what Jacob's doing. I would not be counseling him in that regard. Hey, man, keep doing what you're doing. You got this. Because it's simply not working. It is causing a bunch of resentment. It's causing arguments to break out that could stop to an extent if he would just bring them to the negotiating table and say, look, let's figure this out together. We're supposed to be a family. Let's do something about this. But he keeps getting what he wants. So why would he want it to stop? I'll move from there to verses 25 through 43. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you should not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks and in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks towards the striped and all the blacks into the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the strong of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they may breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Laban, continuing to show his shrewdness, deals with his son-in-law so that he will remain on top and in charge of the situation. Knowing that Jacob is homesick, he seeks to find a way to prevent him from leaving, as Laban still has immense control over him and has benefited from him immensely. It is directly mentioned, hey, he wasn't as rich as he is now until Jacob came along. And part of this is that he has learned through some form of divination that he has prospered because of the presence of Jacob. Now, the Hebrew word that is used here is nihasti, which I think is the only time that's used in Scripture, but it is derived from the root word nakash, which basically means divining, trying to look into the future using more human means, not in the way that God would desire us to seek the future. So later on in the Pentateuch, we will see God call such actions sinful and are something that the Israelites are not to engage in. Now, point against, real quick, are the Urim and Thummim, which are something that God does allow the Israelites to use in order to divine his messages, because he said they could, versus them making up their own thing. Now, we're not exactly sure where the heck the Urim and Thummim come from. They just kind of appear on the scene later on, and everyone acts like they've always been here. It's kind of like, when they add that character to a TV show and they're like, hey, man, how's it going? And you've never once seen them before in their life, but the characters are acting as if they've always been there. It's kind of like that with the Urim and Thummim. They are used in Scripture as a way to divine answers from God under his supervision. Stress that part, his supervision. Now, it is possible that such things exist in this time and place. We don't know because we're not told when they existed first. That's me kind of editorializing, me like, if I was writing the story, I would have written things differently, but I also have to say I'm also not God. So he is free to do as he pleases when he directs Moses to write this down. Now, it is possible that Laban used similar means to do so, and that because he did so, God gave him a favorable answer, or what is more likely, in my opinion, is that Laban used incorrect and sinful divination to learn his fortunes and the future, and God gave him an answer anyways for Jacob's sake. This could be anything from like reading the entrails of an animal, or watching how birds fly, or using tea leaves to see what the shape makes in there, or what have you. There was 1,000 different ways this could have happened, and they would have all been wrong unless Laban had done so correctly, seeking after God's true word. Now, the reason I stress that even though he was doing the wrong thing and it's still possible for God to give him an answer anyways, we're going to see this later on when we get to, Numbers in Deuteronomy? I would say Numbers first, where Balaam will be someone who is a prophet outside of God, who sometimes listens to what God says and sometimes doesn't, but God will still use Balaam, despite his apostasy, to get his own plans out there. He will use sinful diviners and prophets for his own plans. He's going to allow Pharaoh's magicians to recreate some of the plagues, just so when they can't, it shows that they have no power next to him. They may have some tricks up their sleeves. They may have some demonic agencies they work through that can replicate some of what God can do, but they're no replacement for God. And this seems to be the case here, that Laban is using alternate means that he shouldn't be doing to try and figure out his fortune, his future, and God answers him despite that. It's kind of as we eventually get into 1 Samuel, when Saul goes to the witch at Endor and begs her to bring up the spirit of Samuel so that he can have him as a prophet again. And depending on how you interpret that verse, I interpreted it as she was a shysta who was trying to fake something, and God actually let something happen that let Samuel's actual soul come there for the earth for a little bit to talk against Saul. But that's its own story forever from now. Right here, it seems Laban has recognized the point being Jacob is the reason for his success. So Jacob, knowing sheep as well as he does, bargains with his father-in-law to obtain an inheritance from him as a rightful son-in-law so that he may have something to support his family with as he leaves. Laban, ever crafty, agrees to Jacob's precise demands and cheats him out of what he desires. Jacob, however, realizing this, learning who his father-in-law actually is as a person, plans against this. And he utilizes symbolic colors through his usage of the sticks from the trees that he got there to show how God will still give him the inheritance as he trusts God to allow the sheep and the goats to have children based on the color specifications Jacob asked for. This is a very primitive understanding of genetics, of how it works. Jacob doesn't have the Punnett squares. He doesn't have Gregor Mendel to look up to so that he can get the qualities that he desires. And for all we know, God is directly changing the genetics to make these sheep and goats come out the way that Jacob desires, which he is perfectly capable of doing. Either way, whether Jacob is some geneticist before his time or God intervene on his behalf to create a miracle, Jacob gets what's his, even though Laban tried to trick him. Because God is blessing Jacob. And this ensures that Jacob's wealth is grown and Laban's is diminished. Had Laban just given Jacob what he wanted, God surely would have blessed him. But because he's so used to the blessings he gets while Jacob is around, Laban gets scared. Laban gets prideful and greedy and tries to engineer, they don't exist in that flock, then Jacob's going to have to stay with me. But God has other plans, as he most often does when it comes to our plans and his. And we'll go from there to chapter 31, verses 1 through 16. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Therefore God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and molted. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that mate with the flock and are striped, spotted, and molted, for I have seen that all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion of inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Jacob here, recognizing that his success has hurt his relationship with his father-in-law, plots to leave and gets emboldened to do so even more when God himself intervenes to ensure that this will be a success and that God will be with him in this journey. But he does not do so without first consulting his wives. As has been mentioned before, there are plenty of things that we can be upset at Jacob for how he handles his relationship with his wives. But one thing to be commended here is that he included them into his plans to leave and sought what they had to say on the issue, which, especially given the times that we're living in at this point in history, for Jacob and them, pretty shocking that he cared at all what they had to say. Women were more likely just supposed to be there and just go along with whatever the man said. This is pretty dang good, especially from our point of view, for him to do. And one of the reasons he does this is that he knows that they are leaving their father, their brothers, and their home behind And that's not an easy choice to make, even with everything that's been going on. So he takes the time to explain rationally why they need to leave and how this will benefit them to do so. And we have Rachel and Leah in a very rare form of unity, a united front from the both of them, agree with Jacob's assessment, and they agree with the desire to flee with him. This is good. Despite everything, Jacob has proven himself someone that they can trust, someone that they know is looking out for them. Is he perfect? No, he's a man. He's going to screw up. It's what we do. But he does want what's best for them. And they recognize that fact. Now we look at Laban, who before he actually shows up on the scene, has proven who he truly is with how he's reacted to the scenario. Laban, who at one point in time once regarded Jacob's successes as his own because he benefited from them, allows his heart to be filled with resentment when his fortunes are flipped and Jacob becomes the only one blessed with wealth. Now, I know it's become more popular these days to decry capitalism and say everything about it is wrong. I'm not one of those people, but I am still a critic. As someone who lives in a capitalistic society, someone who does like what we're doing as far as other forms of economics are concerned, like it's probably the best of what we got. It's not really the best of the best, but it's better than other options. But as we look through history, one thing we see with capitalism is kind of almost always been a part of it as long as there has been a desire for goods and services, which sounds like the vast majority of human history to me. There is nothing inherently evil with the system of capitalism. But as has been proven multiple times over, just even in our own lifetimes, forget about any crises we've had before about fake inflation or people embezzling funds, like just in our own lifetimes, many of those who are successful at capitalism do so at the denial of the needs of others, or who knowingly cause harm to their consumer and their worker. Once again, nothing wrong with accumulating wealth. Abraham was wealthy because God had blessed him. Jacob is wealthy for the same reasons. It is a good thing to be blessed in that manner. It is also a good thing to be poor. How God chooses to bless someone is up to him. And he blessed Jacob with wealth. However, in contrast to Laban, Abraham used his wealth for others. Jacob is going to be using his wealth for others, not only to enrich himself, but also to look after other people. Their wealth benefits others and brings them closer to God because they recognize without him, I would not have this wealth. Laban only wants to benefit himself, and for this, he has failed to honor God with the wealth God allowed him to have, which God can just as easily take away. He has cheated his nephew and, by extension, his daughters and grandchildren, all for the sake of profit. That is where people go wrong. That is where we have the Jeff Bezoses of the world, who could easily solve a lot of problems out there. The Elon Musks of the world could easily solve a lot of problems, or at least make them better if they didn't hoard it, if they used it for more practical things, if they were actually using it for the betterment of human society, of the children of God. Now, I highly doubt that Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk is listening to this. I see the viewerships. I see I see where people actually listen to this too, even assuming VPNs. Chances are, if you're listening to this, you don't really have a lavish lifestyle. Maybe some of you are able to afford things and not really worry about your next paycheck, which hats off to you. Some of us do. But either way, the very same can be true of us no matter how much money we have in our bank accounts. Is that all we care about is how much we can get and how much it benefits me, instead of thinking about where it goes, no matter how rich we are, no matter how poor we are. Look, I'm not calling you to give it all away to charity and live without your money unless he tells you to do so. And I would be very careful to make sure that was him if I were you. But if he says it, do it. But what I am doing is I'm gently reminding you, and I'm gently reminding me, that all wealth that we receive is from God. It is his, and it needs to be used wisely in the service of furthering the kingdom, wherever he specifically tells you to put that money. Wherever it is, Do it. Not because I said to do it, not because, someone else said to do it, but because he did. I don't know where that is, where that realm is. Homeless ministry, trying to find cures to diseases, just making sure that the church has money to get the stuff done so they can send money to missionaries or whatever. Like, where he tells you to put that money, you put that money there, even if it's just in a general tithe. You're trusting in God that he's going to use that money elsewhere where it should be. I may not know where he wants you to put it, but I do know that he calls you and he calls me to use that money wisely. So we need to be careful, no matter how much we have, to use it as he says, no matter what the cost is to ourselves. And we'll go from there to verses 17 through 35. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. After many years away from home, 2 decades, a little longer, Jacob has left to come back to the land that had been promised to him via the promise God made with Abraham. For 20 some years, he hasn't heard from his mother or father or his brother. Now the time has come to get back into the situation he fled from. It's not an easy decision to make, but it is the faithful one, and he is rewarded for it. But unfortunately, we see that although Rachel agreed earlier that God had been more faithful to them than their father, she still stole an idol from her father, multiple, more than likely, and brought it with her. Just like with Lot's wife turning back to look at Sodom, Rachel was clinging on to the things that she knows aren't good for her, but make her feel comfortable, which as a result leads to a conflict that never should have happened. Now, we're not entirely sure exactly what these household idols are. There's a lot of debate whether they're actually idols of the land of Padan Aram, or that they're family idols. Like some in Rome, some people would have like household gods, like this is specifically for the house of blah blah blah, and it would be very different. This other house would have a god that was their god. It's all over the place. Or if these were just like not even idols, but something that was extremely valuable that Rachel was maybe thinking, "Oh, if I keep this, maybe we could sell it along the way and get more money." Regardless, it shows where her heart is, that she's clinging on to the things of where she came from in the land of the people that would have had these same customs, would have been worshiping probably similar gods, if not the same one as the idol that she had taken from her dad. And it shows that she's not where she needs to be, to the point where she lies And as far as I can recall, it is never directly called out for this. May have been a contributing factor into what will happen to her later on. I don't know if I'm going to take a bullet for that idea, but it's something that kind of just popped up. It shows our sinful hearts and desires and what matters more to us. Yeah, I'm serving God, but I'm also holding on to my specific sin, and I'm keeping away from everyone else. Or these thoughts that I have, it's like, okay, God, you want me to go here, but I want to go over here, but I'm going to go in this direction you told me to, hoping and praying that you're actually going to send me the way I want to go. We've all been there. Rachel's there at this moment. If you're in that moment, just recognize I can't be there. I should walk away. I should repent and turn to where he wants me to go. Because all things like this are cause problems. Look, life is rough enough doing what God tells us to do, the holy and good things he tells us to do, without us bringing our own sin and compulsions into the mix that cause even further problems. Like, don't do this to yourselves. Don't do this to me, Christian. Walk away from it. Now, as we get into this, we see that Laban has allowed his pride to cloud his judgment, which God recognizes, and he uses this dream to gently chastise him and how he's going to handle this argument with Jacob so that he doesn't make rash decisions. Now, Laban, across this time here, I think has fully shown himself as someone that, even proven himself, I would say, who doesn't fully believe in God and that he maintains idol worship in his own house, but that God can still reason with him and use him in the midst of his apostasy. Laban doesn't fully commit to what God told him to do, but I think it's still in the back of his mind, and even if he brings it up, he's not going to be acting as rashly as he would have because God had spoken to him. If he had not, I imagine things would have gone 1,000 times worse here. Now, Jacob likes it, unrighteously accused of evil. But in the process of promoting his innocence, Jacob makes a rash vow, promising death to the one who stole the idols, not knowing that this would mean the death of the woman he loves more than anything else, more than anyone else, should she be found out. When we are accused of sin, we must be careful not to let our emotions get the better of us. We know that we haven't done anything wrong, that we haven't done the things that we've been accused of, and we will promise literally anything in order to have the suspicion taken away from us. But that doesn't mean we lose our heads in order to save our appearance. Jacob should have just promised that if anyone stole the idols, to have given them back once found, and then promised to punish the culprit on his terms, as it would have been a member of his entourage, not Laban's. Laban does not own them, and he should be making this definitive statement to him, as it would have been a member of his entourage that did it. Instead, he almost loses Rachel had she not lied and not acted as in she was in the midst of her menstruation. Maybe she even was, and that would have helped further her lie, to prevent her theft from being discovered. There's a good desire within us when we've been accused of something evil to say, no, I haven't. Let me do whatever it takes to prove I haven't. Is where things go off the rails. Is where we can be led astray by our own desires to do good, to not be seen as evil. But unfortunately, you end up in those scenarios sometimes, and we cause further harm to ourselves by trying to prove that we didn't do anything wrong. So just take the time to think about it, move on, and realize there's got to be a better way out than to just make a knee-jerk reaction that's only going to cause further woe. And we'll finish off today by going through verses 36 through 55. So thanks for sticking around for as long as you have. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all your goods, through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was by day, the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep had fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galid. Both of these mean they mean the same thing in Aramaic and Hebrew. It's the heap of witness. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named the Galid and Mizpah meaning watchpost. For he said, the Lord watch between you and me while we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me, which is real rich from you, buddy. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness that I will not pass over this heap to you, and that you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Jacob has every right to be angry because, as far as he knows, he is being falsely accused of something he hasn't done. This has been building up for 20-some years, and he is about to blow up in front of his father-in-law's face. We need to be careful in how we deal with anger so that when we confront those who have hurt us, we speak rationally and lovingly and without malice. Laban deserves to be yelled at for his actions, but Jacob could easily make the situation worse with how he handles his anger. Instead, he systematically and rightfully points out the many strikes and offenses that Laban has committed against him and his family, and that he did so to someone who was immensely faithful to Laban. I'm sure Laban's sons aren't treating him the same way that Jacob is treating Laban. I'd even be willing to take a bullet for that one. But yet Jacob is the one he has a problem with. So Laban, rather than listen to reason, instead pedals backward and still has the audacity to claim ownership over the things and people that haven't been his for many years, just so he can save face. Jacob, diplomatically, and realizing that this would be the only way to stop things from progressing to violence, agrees to make a covenant with Laban and mark the spot where this occurred. This helps placate Laban and ensures Jacob's family's survival, and Laban leaves them behind. It's real rich of Laban to talk about how Jacob could possibly be the one oppressing his daughters, considering how he has handled the scenario where they ended up being Jacob's wives in the first place. It was like, how dare you take on another wife when all this is going on? That I caused, by the way. Oh, no, I'm not going to mention that. This is your fault. But Jacob, being the better man, and I was actually having a discussion with someone last night that I work with about this scenario. Like, why does being the better man feel like I didn't win? And I got to be honest, I agree with his assessment sometimes. Is that, yeah, it's just so much better to just have that one witty comment that breaks down the other person's argument, or to call them out in front of everyone else, or all this mess. But sometimes the good play, the godly play, might be to just walk away from the situation, might be to just calmly explain why that person is wrong, or just to remove yourself completely. And they may say something to you. I know it's happened to me, of them getting the last word in and maybe someone laughing at you that has also heard it. and it feels like they've won the argument, even though I did the moral thing, I did the right thing, the godly thing. It doesn't feel like it. I don't like that. I want to win. Like I come from a family of very competitive people. So as part of humility in my journey with God, I've had to learn that just because winning looks like this to the world, it doesn't look the same way to God. Winning isn't always having that snappy one-liner that destroys someone's confidence and makes your argument just that much better. Sometimes it's just stopping and letting them have the last word and knowing that you did the right thing, even though it doesn't feel like it. Now, Jacob got to say something back to Laban, but for the interest of peace, for the interest of loving this man who has brought accusations against him that are completely unfounded for Jacob specifically, he makes peace. He lets him feel like the big man in the scenario, even though he is wealthier than Laban right now, even though he is blessed by God more than Laban will ever be. Jacob is the better man, and the world is better off for it. So for all the strikes, all the things Jacob has done, he has been faithful to Laban. He has loved his father-in-law, taken care of his daughters, taken care of his children, and listened to what God has had to say. Laban can't say that. Jacob can. And oh, by the way, people will talk about Jacob for years, way more than they'll ever be talking about Laban. So good will always win in the end. It won't always feel like it. Someone may never know until we're up in glory one day and God talks about it. But it will. Good will win. And with that, guys, thank you for sticking through this entire process here, getting through these 3 chapters. Had a heck of a time recording them, but I am ready to stop. It is so nice to be able to stop using my voice after so long. So just a reminder, next week should have Genesis 32 with Brandon Knight of My Seminary Life. Looking forward to that conversation. It's going to be a fun time between the two of us. Please, if you get a chance to leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice, just help us with the ratings. If you're interested in my own fiction writing, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon by searching for the name MC Ashley. If you're all interested in some further solid studies into the Bible and its teachings, then check out the other members of the Anna's Out Ministries podcasting network. Contact me at letnothingmoviepodcast@gmail.com. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Joshua Knoll for the editing that he does and for the music he adds to the podcast. And with all that in mind, God bless you on accordance to his will and not mine. And allow me one more time to remind you, let nothing move you. Hey guys, are you interested in podcasting but don't know where to go? Well, check out Zencaster.com and go ahead and make an account there and use special promo code Let Nothing Move You, all caps. That way you can get 30% off of your next deal to go ahead and set things up so you can figure out how to edit stuff using Zencaster.com to host your stuff, to get things done there. So check out Zencaster.com, use special promo code Let Nothing Move You. All right, see ya.